And picking up where we left off, moving right along, coming in at the letter C, we have the literally insane story of the hospital, which we're told was built by Baltimore County and was enlarged by donations from the state of Maryland to the tune of $140,000, and that it was designed by G. Milliman. And so the word enlarged suggests that there was a building there already, which is telling in and of itself. But when did these enlargements take place? There's no date listed on this medallion, but looking at its location on the map, it's on the same plot of land that Johns Hopkins sits today. A hospital, they tell us, wasn't built for another 60 plus years. And so I asked myself, could this Hopkins building be this original hospital building made over? Because the narrative says that this building was demolished to make way for the new Hopkins building. Sure it was. And so it turns out that, according to the gatekeepers, this hospital was originally known as the Public Hospital of Baltimore, and it was allegedly built in 1797, just like the assembly rooms, both apparently built with population growth in mind. And so doing some digging, it turns out that this allegedly wasn't built until 1798, and that this hospital actually dates back to 1794, when one Captain Yellett, or perhaps Yella, if the T is silent, establishes a retreat for ailing mariners, whom I'm guessing came down with a bad case of shore leave, considering this location is over a mile from any port in the city, and that Captain Yella built a building that may or may not have been located on this spot and incorporated into this building, and that the enlargements started taking place in 1798 after the General Assembly passes an act to build a new hospital for the relief of indigent sick persons and for the reception and care of lunatics. And it's interesting that they say the construction started after the site was purchased from Captain Yella in May 1798, and that the building was occupied later that year, indicating that the new building was built quickly or that there was reconstruction going on, right? And there's a lot of weirdness around the story of the construction of this hospital. This is really just the Cliff Notes version. But regardless of how it happened, this building was built and opened by the end of 1798, just in time for a yellow fever outbreak. And all the while these enlargements are happening, and they were completed by 1819, leaving the building as we see it in this drawing. And it says that when these enlargements were completed, this building could accommodate about 40 lunatics and 150 other patients, or roughly 200 patients in total. Now, look at the size of this thing. Does a max occupancy of roughly 200 patients make sense here? About as much sense as the money they spent on this. Because Poppleton tells us that this enlargement cost $140,000 over a 15-year period or so. And I wish I knew where he came to this figure, because there's one source that has these renovations costing $154,000 by 1819. But when you actually add up these listed figures of money appropriated for these refurbishments, they add up to $163,000. And so $140 to $154 to $163,000. These are huge disparities. And one report even has these renovations exceeding $200,000. But this may have actually been the city attempting some real estate fraud to inflate the asking price for a proposed sale of the property. And this brings up something else to consider, that the prices listed on this map may not be accurate at all, and that the building costs or renovation costs or what have you could have been much less than what's listed here. Some of these prices may be inflated, and cheap construction materials may have been used because apparently this hospital building was falling apart by 1834, barely 15 years after all of these renovations were complete. But despite all of that, they keep fixing the old girl up until it's decided to move the hospital out of the city to its present location in Catonsville, and this spiffy new building made for it, which allegedly started construction in 1853, but wasn't completed until 1872, thanks to overspending and a little Civil War interruptus. And it's after this new hospital opens that Johns Hopkins executors allegedly purchased this property demolishing this building to build their new hospital. But the story of Spring Grove doesn't end there for us, because Spring Grove goes on to conduct a 13-year study on the use of LSD in the treatment of psychological conditions. And this is just amazing. And these types of studies could have been going on off the books for years by this time, because allegedly LSD was discovered or invented, as the case may be, in 1938, with human trials beginning in 1943. And this plays right into the Mud City paradigm, because in Mud City, Gen Pop has been getting dosed by God knows what for decades now. And all of this lunatic asylum talk harkens back to my boy, the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury, and the idea that these lunatic asylums were set up for people who were rejecting the new programming. And of course, seeing all the public funds being thrown in this direction as far back as 1798, it's clear the governments of Baltimore and Maryland viewed lunatic asylums as good business. And they still do. And even better, the alleged site of the old lunatic asylum is now home to the Bloomberg Center for Public Health. Are you kidding me? And of course, the Bloomberg Center for Public Health was started by the Rockefeller Foundation. And so it's amazing that the institution dictating so much of our public health policy today is located on the site of a lunatic asylum.
Oh, sweet irony!
This is just a fantastic story, right? From lunatic asylum to Hopkins to LSD to Bloomberg. It's just incredible. And so closing it out on this hospital building so I can move on, using the provided $140,000 figure, this enlarged hospital cost in the neighborhood of $3.5 million today. Next on the top shelf is the courthouse, which was another Gene Milliman production, and it was finished, not enlarged, not improved upon, not built, but finished in AD 1813. But I found out that construction allegedly began in 1805, same year as the Basilica. So I guess it was important to them to have their religious and legal institutions get off the ground at the same time. And this courthouse allegedly cost a whopping $150,000 over that 8-year period, or roughly $4 million today. And like the hospital before it, the main courthouse in Baltimore City today sits at this location. And so this monstrosity was allegedly constructed between 1896 and 1899. And so there's no way that these are the same structure, right? And so with the bias being that this map is lying, the truth of it is that there's no proving that this building ever existed in the first place. It requires faith in the source material to believe this building existed. So this monstrosity could have been there the whole time. But regardless, history does tell quite the story for courthouses in Baltimore. The first of which was allegedly located where the Battle Monument stands today. And what's interesting about this is that when they wanted to extend Calvert Street further north, they allegedly raised that first courthouse building off the ground, and the traffic of Calvert Street would run underneath it. And unbelievably, even though this first courthouse was allegedly demolished 32 years before the travel guide comes out, Benji includes it among his drawings. And even better is that he gives us a before and after. And so this is the courthouse before it was raised up over Calvert Street, which apparently didn't exist at all at this time. And this little building here is the powder magazine. Yep, they stored gunpowder right beneath a government building. Guy Fawkes and the gunpowder plot, anyone? And this gets better because here's the courthouse after they raise it up, which was allegedly done to extend Calvert Street, which, if they did, you would still be going over a cliff to pass underneath this thing. And so the question I have is, why do this at all? They level this whole thing about 15 years after they go through the trouble. Why? They were clearly planning on extending Calvert Street because it's on the 1792 city plan, presumably raised on high this way. So you're trying to tell me that they spent the next 8 years going nowhere through this tunnel? I don't know, but I do love that Benji has now given me this sort of riverbank imagery for this feature on the map. I really love that. But while digging into this story, I did find a Baltimore City plan I had never seen before. And this one's from 1801. And sure enough, the courthouse or the battle monument or something is in this spot, even though the narrative tells us that there shouldn't be anything there in 1800. So that's kind of interesting, but not as interesting to me as perhaps my favorite feature on this map, which is the title area up here, because it has our girl Diana in her role as Queen of the Harvest, shepherding over the world. It's really amazing. You just cannot make this type of thing up. But regardless, the main point of this story is that the story of the first courthouse in Baltimore stinks. But regardless, they tell us that this is where the battle monument stands today. Also interesting about this location where the battle monument stands today is that it was the location where the Declaration of Independence was given its first public reading in Baltimore. And then, some 39 years later, on the same spot, they're dedicating a monument to people who were killed in another war with Britain. And so there's an interesting coincidence there, and we're going to talk more about the battle monument later on as well. But before moving on, I do want to showcase this picture of the new courthouse as a prime example with what was possible with photo editing at the turn of the last century. And this isn't even a very good example because you can clearly see that this image was cut and pasted and that these people and this horse and these poles were drawn on. But I do like that you can see the grade of this building by looking at these basement windows. Because when you go to the courthouse today, these windows go deep below the sidewalk. And here's my best attempt at recreating this image, but what it doesn't show is the giant concrete fence or barrier that runs around the other side of this building. And so here's that. All right, so there's my stick against this portion of the fence, barricade, whatever you want to call this thing. And my stick is 57, 58 inches tall, so... And again, okay, so now I'm hanging over the barrier. And I don't know. Ooh, there's more brick down there. I have to see if I can't get a better look at that. Hopefully you can see it. It's hard to see the face of my camera doing this. But this is an easy 20-foot drop, if not more. I don't know if you can see that pipe hanging out of there. This is a deep trench around the courthouse. Why? Especially when they build the sidewalk up to the sides of so many other buildings. Why is this moated out the way that it is? This window right here in front of me, that would be completely below the sidewalk if they put the sidewalk up to the side of the building, and all of these going down. And so moving on. All right, so coming in at E is for expensive. We have the Union Bank, which is another R.C. Long production, right? So his resume is growing. And Poppleton gives us a lot of information about the Union Bank, except for when it was built. And so Googly informed me that the Union Bank was built in 1807. And Poppleton informs us that it cost $112,000. And so this works out to just over $3 million today, which is quite the price tag for a building like this given the era. And so I have to wonder how much of that money was invested in the basement vault or brick strong room, as they were called at the time. Because Poppleton lets anyone handling this map know where there's $2 million in capital just hanging out. And looking at it, it's $2.5 million. So, it's a lot of money. This is roughly $69 million today.
69, dudes!
And he lets us know when that money exchanges hands. So any whore, pusher, thief, or con man stumbling around Baltimore had 2.5 million reasons to loiter in front of the Union Bank. At least during the months of January and July, anyway. And I love that their discount days are on Mondays and Thursdays. What kind of discount did you get at the bank in 1822? But regardless, all of this action takes place just a stone's throw from Baltimore's financial and political district, which is filling out nicely, right? We have the bank over here. We have the courthouse, the battle monument, erect in the center. Up here we have Rembrandt's City Hall, where I'm sure he's painting up portraits of the perfect city government, right? And then we have the assembly room / library. And so again, filling out nicely down here, right? And so not to leave it out, we have Latrobe's picture of Union Bank from the 1832 travel guide, right? And right away, it's like, where did these grade level windows come from? Because they're not on this 1822 illustration. Right? So why did he add them? Or why did this artist leave them off? And at the very least, we have to ask ourselves, what is up with Benji Latrobe and these grade level windows, right? Because he adds them here, but takes them away here. So this is very strange, right? They say the devil is in the details, and the details of Benji Latrobe's illustrations just aren't adding up. And so next up, what the F? It's the Exchange and Custom House, another Benji Latrobe joint. And wouldn't you know it, the company strikes again. Which company? Because they put an astronomical sum of money into this building. $500,000 or $13 million today. And I believe this is the most expensive building on the map. And it was located in that same Monument Square neighborhood as the Assembly Rooms and the Courthouse and Peel's Art Gallery. And so here's Benji's tour guide image of it, which is just much easier on the eyes, right? And yeah, so the Exchange and Custom House was what they said it was, right? This was the stock exchange where international trade through Baltimore was regulated. And we talked about the telegraph that was allegedly connected to one of the windows of this dome. But to me, these look like two separate buildings. Like this tower with the dome in the center is a different construction than these two warehouse additions on the side. And so in Mud City, I have this center part with the dome as a genuine old world American structure, whatever that may mean to you, and that these warehouses were built later on, but conceivably earlier than we're told this building was built. And one of the reasons I think this is that because the dome was allegedly supported by 12 ionic columns of Italian marble. And so with the help from my stalwart companion Googly, we determined that 12 ionic columns of Italian marble cost $55,000 in 1815. And that would have been before the shipping, which also would have been exorbitant, perhaps as much as the cost of the columns themselves. How is this not prohibitively expensive in 1815? Not to mention impractical. And there are marble monuments and buildings going up all over the place at this time. So it must have been a very lucrative time to be in the Italian marble trade. I'm very curious as to where all this money was coming from. If the money was even legit, because apparently our friends in the company may have been running their own real estate scam. Because while Poppleton tells us that the Exchange and Customs House cost $500,000, apparently the true cost was a little bit closer to $200,000. And so, did the members of the company just get to whack up this $300,000 overture amongst themselves? Yeah, my fat senses tell me it's so. And there is a picture of this one, which was apparently taken just minutes before its inglorious demise because they knocked this thing down and replaced it with this building. And I'm willing to bet that those columns aren't made of marble. And so we're going to stop it here and pick up in the next one.